From the Church of at Crow's Nest. This week I had some red apples at home, and so I decided to bake a delicious apple pie. Just as soon as I finished putting the icing on the cake, I'm going to be telling you the story of a cook. Yes, somebody who works in the kitchen who became a saint. And so the story starts. Euphrosynos' family was very poor, poorer than the mice that lived in the empty little chapels in the countryside of his village. When he was a young man, he left his village and his parents' home to try and find a job. One afternoon, while Euphrosynos was wondering whether he would find supper and a bed for the coming night, he saw a small church and monastery. He began to run racing against the sun, as he knew that the monastery gate would soon be shut and barred tightly for the night. When Euphrosynos arrived, the old monk who guarded the gate said, "You're very lucky, my boy," he said. "Some saint was watching over you. Another second and the gate would have been locked. Follow me and we'll find you some supper and then a bed for the night." Early the next morning, the boy was taken to see the monk in charge of the monastery, the abbot or the Yedonda. Euphrosynos knelt in front of the old man and kissed his hand. The abbot felt pity for the ragged boy. He had seen at once that Euphrosynos needed a home. He decided that the boy should remain at the monastery and help in the kitchen. Euphrosynos was grateful to the kind old abbot. He was happy to stay at the little monastery. All the monks smiled and were grateful to Euphrosynos. "What a great blessing has befallen us," they said, because they knew that kitchen duty was a lot of work. Without complaint, the new cook did all his duties. In the years that followed, Euphrosynos spent most of his time in the monastery kitchen. The walls and the ceiling of the kitchen were black, stained by the smoke from the open fire where the food was cooked. His face was sometimes black too. But Euphrosynos was happy and peaceful in his love for Jesus. Even when he peeled the potatoes and vegetables, he remembered to say his prayers. Euphrosynos was always the last monk to sit down at the long table for dinner, even though he was so tired. He was always obedient and did whatever was asked with a smile. He tried to finish his work quickly so he could slip away to the back of the church, listening to the prayers and chants that he loved, and slowly learned these all off by heart. Now, among the monks at the monastery was an old priest. He had served many nearby villages and was now resting at the monastery, but he longed to see paradise. The old priest was impatient. Why could I not see heaven now? One evening, alone in his cell, the old priest knelt before an icon, praying with all his soul that God would grant his wish. In his dream that night, the priest found himself in a little monastery on a hillside where there was a beautiful garden. Someone was standing in the middle of the garden. Who could it be? If you said Euphrosynos, you were right. Euphrosynos? But he's just the cook, thought the priest. Euphrosynos appeared to be completely at home in this paradise. What are you doing here, Euphrosynos? Asked the priest. This garden belongs to God's friends. He promised it to them long ago, said Euphrosynos. Still in disbelief, the priest asked, Can you give me something from this garden? By God's grace, I can give you whatever you like, said Euphrosynos. May I have some of those apples, please? Asked the priest, pointing to the tall apple tree. Euphrosynos went to the tree, picked some red apples and handed them to the old priest. May you enjoy these apples, Reverend Father, said Euphrosynos. At that moment, the old priest was suddenly awakened by the wooden gong in the monastery courtyard. I've been dreaming, he muttered sadly. He was very disappointed. God had not granted him his vision of heaven after all. Just then, the old priest looked at his feet, and there lay the shining red apples that Euphrosynos had given him from the tallest tree in paradise. But he had to check with Euphrosynos to see if this was true. The old priest ran quickly and found Euphrosynos. My son, the old priest began, tell me where you were last night. Yes, Reverend Father, God performed a miracle last night, said Euphrosynos. Last night I was in paradise, the place prepared by God for his friends. You saw me there, for you were in paradise too. The old priest fell on his knees and gave thanks to God. God had performed a miracle and had let him see paradise. The old priest hurried to tell the miracle to the abbot and the other monks. He showed them the beautiful red apples from heaven that Euphrosynos the cook had given him. The other monks were amazed because they hadn't recognized the saint who worked so hard in the smoky kitchen. Now a miracle had showed Euphrosynos' holiness and his pure, kind heart. The story of the miracle and the apples from heaven spread quickly throughout the countryside. Many people came to see the little whitewashed monastery, to see Euphrosynos and the beautiful apples. As it turned out, the apples had miraculous powers of healing. When people touched them, they were cured at once. Euphrosynos still remained humble and didn't think that he was better than anyone else. But what he wanted the most was to be peaceful in prayer and to continue his simple cooking. And this was no longer possible, and so one morning he quietly left the monastery. Saint Euphrosynos the cook, like all saints, shows us how to be kind, to remember to say our prayers, and to be patient and obedient through his beautiful story and his miraculous apples from heaven, his gift of love. Many people throughout the world have an icon of Saint Euphrosynos the cook, showing a saint holding a branch of shining red apples in their kitchen. You may have one too. We celebrate the memory of Saint Euphrosynos every year on the 11th of September. As part of your activities today, boys and girls, you can colour in or paint your very own icon of Saint Euphrosynos. Also, if you have some lovely red apples, just like the ones that Saint Euphrosynos gave to the priest in the story, I have given you a recipe for the cake that I made. You can bake it with an adult. Have a great day, boys and girls, and see you next time.